All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tackling a concept that is, well, it's absolutely massive. It's ancient, it's universal, and it is still, the source of almost every single political fight on the planet.
We are wrestling with justice. And the thing is, it's this huge idea that thinkers from, Plato all the way up to modern philosophers like John Rawls have spent their entire lives trying to define.
Right.
But at the same time, it's just so intensely personal.
It is, and that's exactly why I wanted to start right where our sources did, with that fundamental, almost pre-philosophical reaction we all have to injustice.
Ah, the playground test. That's
Okay.
what it's often called.
The playground test, exactly.
Yeah, our sources really emphasize this. You don't need to have studied ethics to get angry about fairness. There seems to be this impulse for it just baked into who we are as social creatures.
Totally. And the sources cited some really fascinating research suggesting that even babies, infants as young as 6 months old, they react when they see things being shared out unequally. So it all starts with that kid on a playground shouting, "That's not fair." That's it. That's the raw, pure starting point for this whole enormous concept.
And it's that instant recognition, isn't it? That some kind of line has been crossed. It comes before any legal code, before any big philosophical book. It's probably a survival mechanism, really.
How so?
Well, it helps ensure that, exploitation doesn't just collapse the whole group. It keeps the social fabric together.
So let's get into those quick, strong reactions that define injustice for us no matter where we are in the world. You mentioned someone cutting in line.
Yeah, that instant, sharp annoyance. We all feel it.
We do.
And it's a violation of a really simple procedural fairness. There's an expectation of reciprocity. You stood there, you waited, you put the time in,
Mm.
and someone else is just trying to game the system.
It's a small thing, but it hits a nerve.
A huge nerve, because it strikes right at the core of social trust.
Okay, or let's take a much more serious example. The outrage we feel when someone is punished for something they absolutely did not do. A miscarriage of justice.
Right, and that violates a principle we're going to talk about a lot, the principle of desert. It's a total collapse of moral accountability.
What do you mean by that? A collapse?
If you can be held responsible for something you didn't do, then the entire structure of, individual choice and consequence, it just falls apart. It means nothing.
And then there's that feeling, the systemic one, when you see honest hard work just completely ignored or even crushed, while, as our sources put it, lazy cruelty seems to be rewarded.
Oh, yeah. It just feels like the world is fundamentally broken. It violates our sense of a moral order. It suggests everything is just chaos.
And then the biggest one, the one that touches on global politics, the feeling when you see extreme inequality,
Yeah.
when some people live in just unimaginable luxury while others are starving, that image, that juxtaposition, it immediately makes you ask questions about the whole system.
It shifts the question from, did that person do a bad thing to, is this entire system unfair?
So we all start with this gut reaction, but the moment we try to write it down, to formalize it, the definition just shatters into a dozen competing ideas.
And that's the mission of this deep dive.
Mm.
Is justice just? Everyone getting the same slice of the pie? Is it about getting what you deserve as an individual?
Or is it just following the law no matter what? Or maybe it's about protecting the weakest members of society.
These are the questions that have so much at stake. What we want to do here is provide a kind of roadmap, a guide to these different, often conflicting ways we understand justice.
And we want to understand why this one idea matters so much that people will protest for it, write laws for it, and even risk their lives for it.
At the end of the day, justice defines what is an acceptable use of power. It's how we decide which institutions are legitimate and which ones are just oppressive.
By mapping all this out from that playground instinct to these huge, complex structures, we can get a better handle on the moral and political core of our lives.
Okay, let's jump into our first segment then, the intuitive foundations. And we have to start with that core instinct we just mentioned, the one that's all about basic moral accounting.
Right. We're talking about justice as desert. It's probably the most common, the most initial instinct people have, the belief that justice means people get what they deserve.
Simple as that. Good actions should be rewarded, bad actions should be punished.
Exactly. It's the core of moral accountability. In theory, it's very straightforward. No one should get away with causing harm. And, on the flip side, no one should be blocked from getting what they've rightly earned through their own effort or talent.
The moral ledger has to balance.
It has to balance.
And the intuitive appeal of this is it's visceral. You feel it in your bones. We need to believe in this. Because if hard work and being a good person don't matter, or worse, if they're punished, then why would anyone bother? Absolutely. The
Yeah.
whole system falls apart. If the world doesn't operate on some principle of deserving, if, cruelty is consequence-free and effort doesn't matter, it's just moral chaos.
It just drains all motivation.
It does. We need that link between what you do and what you get to keep society functioning.
But, and this is the big but, the moment you actually try to define what deserving means, the whole concept starts to get really frayed at the edges.
Oh, immediately. The cracks appear right away.
So what are the big questions that challenge this idea?
Well, the questions are sort of twofold. There are administrative ones and then deeper moral ones.
Okay, what's an administrative one?
Who decides what counts as deserving? Is it the market, the government, your community? And how on earth do you measure something as subjective as effort?
Right. A teacher might work incredibly hard, way harder than a hedge fund manager, but the market rewards them in wildly different ways.
Exactly. So is market value the same thing as moral desert? That question alone it's a deep, deep rabbit hole.
And it also raises the question of luck, doesn't it? How do you separate genuine effort from just dumb luck?
And that gets into this idea of moral luck. If I'm born with a natural talent for, say, coding, and I happen to live during a tech boom, did I really deserve the millions I might make more than someone born with an incredible talent for, I don't know, basket weaving in an era that doesn't value that? Desert-based justice really, really struggles to account for the lottery of birth.
Which leads us to the biggest, most uncomfortable question of all, the one that forces us to pivot. What about the starting line? If one person is born into a wealthy, stable family with connections and great schools, and another is born into poverty and chaos, how can you possibly compare their effort in a fair way?
You can't. If Desert is only about the effort you put in after the starting gunfires, but the starting lines themselves are miles apart.
Then the outcome isn't really earned.
No, it's just the logical result of a pre-existing systemic inequality.
I'm thinking of the philosopher Michael Sandel, who often asks this. He says, can we really say a great basketball player deserves his millions when his salary depends entirely on the fact that millions of people just happen to enjoy watching basketball?
It's a great point. If everyone suddenly decided they preferred chess, his desert would just evaporate. Poof, gone. Even though his effort and talent are the same.
So that forces us to zoom out. We have to ask, is justice only about individual actions? Did you work hard? Did you cheat? Or does it have to include the fairness of the whole system, the structures that determine what's even possible?
And that pivot, that's what takes us to our second intuitive foundation, procedural justice.
Yeah.
Or justice is fairness.
Okay, so this shifts the focus away from the outcome, what you ended up with, and onto the rule book, how you got there.
Exactly. This is the really powerful idea that justice is defined by fair rules that are applied the same way to everybody. The process, the how, becomes the most important thing.
So what are the key components of that? It sounds like we're basically talking about the bedrock of a legal system.
We are. First and foremost, equality before the law. This is a flat-out rejection of arbitrary power. It means no special treatment for the rich or the powerful. The law applies to everyone.
And it also means no discrimination, right, based on race, gender, religion, things like that.
Absolutely. Impartiality is the key. And procedural justice demands you build systems to ensure that impartiality.
Like what?
Like neutral judges, clear laws that everyone can understand beforehand, and this is maybe the most important part, consistent enforcement. If the rules of the game change depending on who's playing, it's not justice anymore, it's just manipulation.
But we all know that feeling of unjust procedure. That feeling that, yeah, the system exists on paper, but in reality, it only works for a select few.
That's the betrayal of the promise. That feeling of injustice comes roaring back when you see the same crime getting wildly different punishments depending on who did it.
Which often reflects class or racial bias.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
Or it happens when there are rules to protect everyone, but only some people can actually afford the lawyer you need to make those rules work for you.
So that gap between the ideal of the rules and the reality of their application, that undermines the whole thing. It makes people feel like the system is rigged.
It does. And this is where we really have to talk about a specific thought experiment that puts this whole idea to the test. We have to bring in John Rawls and his famous idea of the veil of ignorance.
Yes, this is a cornerstone of modern political philosophy. Let's really break it down.
Okay, so Rawls said, imagine you have to design the basic rules of society, but you have to do it from behind a metaphorical veil of ignorance.
And behind this veil,
You know nothing about yourself. You don't know your race, your gender, your class. You don't know if you're smart or not, healthy or sick. You don't even know what your personal ambitions are. You're completely impartial.
The genius of this is that it makes your own self-interest work for justice.
Exactly. Since you don't know if you're going to end up being rich or poor, a man or a woman, part of a majority or a minority,
Yeah.
you would have to choose rules that protect the most vulnerable people.
Just in case that turns out to be you.
It's your ultimate insurance policy. If you knew you were going to be rich, you'd pick rules that fiercely protect wealth. But since you don't know, you create the most protective, least exploitative system you can possibly imagine.
This view is incredibly powerful when it comes to guaranteeing equal respect and protecting us from arbitrary power. It says we're all subjects of the law, not just objects for the powerful to manipulate.
It is.
Yeah.
But, and here's the question that pushes us to the next level. What if those perfectly fair procedures, impartial judges, consistent laws, everything, what if they still produce outcomes that are just grossly unequal?
So one person following all the rules ends up with almost everything, and another person also following the rules ends up with nothing.
Right. Is procedural fairness enough? Or does justice also have to say something about how the pie is actually divided up at the end?
And that throws us right into the deep end of the debate over equality, which is, where almost all our modern political fights live.
Which brings us to segment 2, the equality spectrum. And we're going from same chances to same shares. This is all about the distribution of resources.
And the core idea here has this really powerful, almost radical appeal. The idea that justice just is equality, that a fair society makes sure no one gets left too far behind and no one gets an unfair advantage.
And the moral justification for that is all about protecting basic human dignity. The idea is that if society lets huge gaps open up, the people at the bottom lose more than just money.
They lose respect, they lose their political voice.
Exactly. They stop being able to participate as full citizens.
But the moment you use the word equality, you hit a wall, because everyone means something different by it. Our sources do a great job of breaking this down into 3 distinct levels of equality. We have to define these really clearly.
Yes, this is crucial. The first level, the absolute foundation, is equality of respect.
This just means everyone counts as a full person. No one is disposable. No one is less human. It's the philosophical basis for human rights.
And critically, this is the one level where there's almost universal agreement, at least in theory.
Right.
I mean, if you reject the idea that every human life has equal inherent worth, you're pretty much outside the bounds of any kind of moral conversation. It's the non-negotiable minimum.
Okay, so moving up the spectrum, we get to the second level. Equality of opportunity.
This is the idea that everyone should have a similar realistic chance to pursue their goals, to get a good education, to compete for a good job.
The ideal being that your success should depend on your talent and your effort, not on who your parents were.
Exactly. Your starting point in life shouldn't predetermine your finishing point.
And a lot of modern societies aim for this, right, through things like public schools and anti-discrimination laws. But making opportunity truly equal it's incredibly difficult in the real world.
It is, because opportunity isn't just about the laws on the books. It's about having access to, good nutrition, safe neighborhoods, mentors, social connections.
So if a kid in a wealthy suburb has tutors and their parents' professional network to lean on, do they really have the same chance as a kid in a poor, underfunded school district?
Probably not. And that's the problem. Opportunity is something you can only really approach. You can never perfectly achieve it.
Why not?
Because the unequal outcomes of the last generation become the unequal starting points for the next generation. Wealth and advantage get passed down. It's a cycle.
It's a perpetually moving
A
target.
perpetually moving target. It takes a huge, constant effort just to get close to fairness.
And that brings us to the third level.
Yeah.
The political flashpoint. The one that causes all the arguments. Equality of outcome.
This is the idea that justice demands that everyone should end up with similar levels of wealth or resources. It's driven by the belief that even if you have fair rules and a shot at equal opportunity, the massive gaps that still result are just morally wrong.
Because they cause too much suffering and they corrode democracy. Okay, so we have to dive into the debate over this because this is where entire political systems diverge. We need to lay out both sides of this argument based purely on our sources and stay completely impartial.
Absolutely. Let's start with the critics of strict equality of outcome. Their argument is a powerful one, and it's rooted in individual freedom and economic dynamism.
Okay, so walk us through their position. Why would some inequality be not just okay, but maybe even necessary?
The critics argue that if some people end up with more because of, choices they made, risks they took, or extra effort they put in,
Yeah.
then that inequality is fair.
So if one person chooses to work 80 hours a week to become a surgeon and another chooses a less demanding job, it's fair that the surgeon ends up with more money.
Exactly. And they'd say, if you then take the surgeon's extra income away just to make things equal, you're essentially punishing them for their hard work and their choices.
And that creates a disincentive.
A huge one. They argue that you need those incentives for a society to innovate and grow. Why take huge risks or work on a difficult problem if you don't get a greater reward for it?
It all comes back to that first principle we talked about, desert.
It does. They say that forcing equal outcomes violates desert, it stifles the economy, and in the end it actually hurts everyone, including the poor, because you have a smaller economic pie to share.
So the argument is my hard work, my risk, my reward. And any attempt to equalize that is fundamentally unjust.
That's the core of the meritocratic or libertarian argument, yeah.
Okay, now let's balance that. Let's hear the counter-argument from the supporters of stronger equality. Why do they say that extreme inequality is unjust, even if it was created legally?
Their argument is less about individual choices and more about systemic power. They contend that once the wealth gap gets too big, the game itself becomes rigged.
How so?
Extreme wealth translates into extreme political power. Through lobbying, campaign donations, media ownership,
Yeah.
the very wealthy can start to rewrite the rules of the game in their own favor.
So the system stops being about procedural fairness.
It completely collapses. The system stops rewarding merit and starts rewarding pre-existing power. It becomes a feedback loop.
So for them, justice isn't just about making sure everyone has a chance at the start. It requires putting limits on how far apart people can get at the end.
Yes, because extreme poverty and extreme wealth are both seen as destabilizing forces that corrupt democracy and create unjust suffering that no amount of equal opportunity can fix after the fact.
It's less about punishing success and more about preserving the integrity of the whole system.
And ensuring social stability. If most people come to believe the system is fundamentally rigged against them, they'll stop respecting the rules altogether.
So the synthesis here is really important. The debate isn't about whether equality matters at all.
No, everyone agrees it does in some form.
The real disagreement is about which kind of equality is the most important. Is it the equality of freedom to succeed or fail? Or is it the equality of basic dignity and minimizing suffering? That dive into equality really makes it clear that these pure philosophical systems often aren't enough on their own. Which brings us to segment 3. Complex justice. Mixing principles and dealing with harm.
Right. And acknowledging that complexity means realizing that most actual societies are, well, they're a messy blend of several of these conflicting principles.
We try to reward effort, but we also feel like we have to have a safety net.
Exactly. We aspire to this kind of cold, impartial fairness, but we're also forced to recognize basic human need.
Our sources highlight what you could call a triad of principles that most modern systems are constantly and often awkwardly trying to balance.
The first pillar in that triad is desert, which we've covered. It's about recognizing effort, contribution, and responsibility. It's the engine of meritocracy.
Then the second pillar is need.
Right. This is the idea that people should get enough support to live with basic dignity just because they're human, not because they've earned it in the marketplace.
So need basically establishes a floor. It says there are certain things, clean water, basic health care, shelter, that are so fundamental to being human that a society has to provide them before it can call itself just.
It fundamentally separates a person's worth from their market value.
Okay, and the third principle in the triad.
That would be rights. These are the non-negotiable protections. Freedom of speech, safety from violence, the right to a fair trial, and critically, these rights have to be protected for everyone.
Even for people who have made bad choices or who don't contribute much to the economy.
Especially for them. Rights are what protect us from the tyranny of the majority or the whims of the powerful.
And it's the conflict between these three, desert, need, and rights, that creates the political battleground we see every single day.
Absolutely. Think about a really successful entrepreneur. They tick the desert box, they've created jobs, wealth. But for a just society, their success might need to be taxed or regulated to protect the needs and rights of everyone else.
Like ensuring there's funding for public schools or that their factories aren't polluting the environment.
Exactly. Or take the opposite example. An elderly disabled person. They might not have much market desert, they can't contribute much, but they still have urgent needs that must be met and fundamental rights that cannot be violated.
So every government budget, every new law is basically an argument about where to draw the lines between these three principles.
It's a constant and frankly excruciating balancing act. And anytime you shift that balance, you get huge political pushback and public anger.
So, moving from the structure of society, let's look at what justice demands after something has already gone wrong, after harm has been done.
Right, justice after the fact, the world of criminal justice. And here we see two really different, often conflicting approaches: corrective or restorative justice and retributive justice.
They have different goals, different focuses.
Completely different measures of success.
Okay, let's start with corrective or restorative justice. What does that actually look like?
The focus here is not on the state punishing the offender. The focus is on repairing the harm that was done to the victim and to the community.
So it might involve something like a mediation where the offender has to actually face the person they hurt.
Exactly. It's about getting them to confront the real human impact of their actions. The goal is centered on healing, not just on hurting back.
So compensation, a real apology, trying to restore what was broken.
Yes. In restorative justice, true justice means the offender has to take active responsibility for fixing the harm they caused, instead of just passively sitting in a cell. It sees crime as an injury to people, not just an offense against the state.
Then you have the more traditional model, retributive justice.
This is the one we're all more familiar with. The focus here is squarely on punishing the wrongdoer to uphold the law.
An eye for an eye.
In a sense, the goal is accountability. It's about giving a punishment, a prison sentence, a fine, that is proportional to the crime. It's meant to rebalance that moral ledger through a penalty.
And the feeling of injustice in this area comes from two places, right?
Right. It happens when harm is just left unrepaired and the victim feels forgotten. Or it happens when the punishment is completely out of whack.
Either way too soft, so it feels like there's no accountability.
Or way too harsh, where it just crosses the line into being cruel and pointless.
And that's the debate we're constantly having in criminal justice. What's the real goal here? Is it revenge? Is it deterring other people? Is it rehabilitating the offender? Or is it about reconciliation?
And those goals are often pulling in completely opposite directions, which creates all this tension in the system.
Okay, this idea of individual fairness versus the fairness of the whole system, it leads us straight into segment 4, where we have to zoom way out and look at the biggest scale: social justice.
The idea of social justice is a really crucial intellectual shift that happened mainly in the 20th century. It moves the whole conversation away from just individual acts.
So it's no longer just about, did this one person treat that one person fairly in this specific situation?
Exactly. It forces you to look at the fairness of the entire system, the structures themselves.
So you're not just asking if the judge in this one case was impartial. You're asking about the whole machine, the laws, the economy, the history that brought that person into that courtroom to begin with.
Precisely. The core questions of structural justice are things like, how are wealth and opportunities actually distributed across the whole society? Are there specific groups, based on race, gender, class, that face predictable, systemic disadvantages no matter how hard they work as individuals?
Are there hidden barriers? Things like historical legacies or biased school funding models that hold entire segments of the population back?
Yes. And the sources give some really clear, practical examples of this. Think about zoning laws in cities. On the surface, a zoning law looks neutral. But very often, these laws are used to restrict affordable housing to certain areas. This concentrates poverty, which then means the schools in those areas, which are funded by local property taxes, are chronically underfunded.
So right away, a child's opportunity is determined by their zip code, not their talent, even though the law itself looks the same for everyone.
That's a perfect example of a structural injustice. Or think about trying to get a business loan. If the bank's criteria, even if they seem neutral, end up systematically denying loans to people from certain neighborhoods or backgrounds,
Then that's a structural barrier to building wealth.
it is. So the core argument of social justice is this. It's not enough to just say the law is the same for everyone if the starting positions are wildly unequal because of history or systemic bias.
If you're starting a race and one person is on a paved track and the other is starting in a deep ditch.
Then yelling the rules of the race are fair for everyone is, well, it's meaningless. Justice means you have to do something about the ditch.
But to maintain our impartiality here, we have to talk about the counter-worry, the pushback against this idea, which is at the heart of so many political arguments today.
Yes, and that counter-worry is significant. There's a deep concern that focusing too much on these big systemic problems can end up eroding the idea of individual responsibility.
How does that play out in practice?
The worry is that people will be held personally responsible or made to feel guilty for huge structural problems that they didn't personally create. If every inequality is blamed on the system, what happens to the importance of individual effort and good choices?
Our principle of desert gets lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fear is that you replace one kind of unfairness, structural inequality with another, where you're punishing people for being successful inside a flawed system. The cure, they worry, becomes punishing individuals.
And that tension is why this is such a difficult, fiery topic. How do you fix the failures of the past without unfairly burdening individuals in the present?
There's no easy answer, but the central insight of social justice remains powerful. You have to look at the overall fairness of the whole society, not just the fairness of single transactions.
And that brings us to maybe the most profound question in this whole deep dive, the psychological one. Why do we care so much? Why does injustice make us so angry, even when it has nothing to do with us directly?
It is fascinating, isn't it? Why does seeing a news report about a stranger being mistreated thousands of miles away trigger a real physical feeling of outrage?
Our sources point to a few really powerful psychological reasons. The first, and maybe the most obvious one, is empathy.
We can imagine ourselves in that person's shoes, that feeling of, that could be me, or what if that was my child? It creates a bond with the victim. It's a survival instinct, really, built on a sense of shared vulnerability,
Okay, that's the second reason.
a deep moral intuition about fairness. Anthropologists see this across cultures. We evolved as social animals who depended on cooperation to survive.
I help you today, you help me tomorrow.
Exactly. Reciprocity. And so cheating or free riding is a direct threat to the survival of the group. Our anger at injustice is basically our internal alarm system going off to police that cheating and keep the social contract from falling apart.
And then there's the third reason, which is about dignity.
A deeply held sense of dignity. This is the feeling that every person has a kind of sacred value, an inherent worth that has nothing to do with how useful or productive they are.
So when you see someone treated like a disposable object, like a means to an end, it feels fundamentally wrong.
It's a much deeper injury than just, say, a financial loss. The violation of the basic premise that we're all entitled to be treated as human.
And finally, a desire for order and meaning.
Yes. Injustice feels like moral chaos. If bad things can happen to good people with no reason and no consequences, it suggests the universe is random and meaningless.
Which is a terrifying thought.
It's deeply unsettling. We desperately want to believe we live in a world where actions have consequences, where good and evil matter, a coherent moral universe.
So the key takeaway here is that the commitment to justice is universal. It's built into our psychology and our biology, even when we're fighting about what justice is.
We're all fighting in the name of our vision of a just world.
We've covered desert, procedure, equality, and structure. So now in our last big segment, we have to look at the tension justice creates when it bumps up against other core human values, especially compassion.
Right. This is the classic ethical showdown, justice versus mercy, or justice versus love. Should we always give people exactly what they deserve? Or should we sometimes just forgive?
It's a real dilemma. Justice, by its nature, is supposed to be cold, impersonal, consistent. It applies the rules the same way to everyone.
Whereas mercy is the opposite. It's warm, it's personal, it's based on compassion and a willingness to set aside strict accountability. How can those two possibly exist in the same system?
It's a tension that every major legal and religious tradition has wrestled with.
And the mature view seems to be that you absolutely have to have both. They have to exist in a kind of dynamic balance because a humane society needs both of them.
Okay, so let's break that down. What happens if you have justice but no mercy?
Justice without mercy becomes cruelty very quickly. It's blind to context, to human error, to the possibility that people can change. If you have zero room for compassion, you can have a system that is technically fair, but causes immense human suffering.
Like putting someone in prison for years for stealing food to feed their family.
A classic example.
Okay, so what about the other way around? What happens if you have mercy but no justice?
Mercy without justice is just chaos, it's indulgence, it's favoritism. If there are no clear consequences for doing harm, the whole social order breaks down. You need the firm boundaries that justice provides to make mercy a meaningful act, rather than just negligence.
So our sources suggest a way to resolve this tension is by thinking about the role each one plays.
The mature view defines justice as setting the floor. It's the absolute minimum standard of fairness, rights, and respect that is owed to every single person. It's the impartial obligation of the state.
So justice is the required minimum. What about love and mercy?
Love and mercy are what go beyond justice. They are the optional acts. Justice demands that the state provides a safety net. Love is what makes you personally give far more than you're required to give. Mercy is what allows you to forgive, even when punishment is technically deserved.
Let's test that. If someone commits fraud and justice demands a 5-year sentence, can mercy override that?
Well, in this mature view, the state's job is to uphold the floor of justice. The sentence is necessary for accountability. But the victim, in their personal capacity, could still choose to extend mercy. They could forgive the moral injury. Or a judge might show mercy by recommending a sentence focused on rehabilitation instead of just punishment.
So justice is the impersonal system, but mercy is the personal choice.
Exactly.
And it leaves us with this really provocative question. We should always aim for what is just, but we also have to keep asking ourselves, when is it right to go beyond justice? When is it right to offer unearned mercy and reconciliation?
And that's the space where, our individual morality really gets put to the test.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We've gone through 5 dense segments. If someone cornered us and said, so, after all that, what is justice? What's the big nuanced answer?
I think we can say that justice is the constant, difficult effort to make sure people are treated with fairness and dignity, that harms get repaired, and that all the benefits and burdens of society are distributed in a way that you could rationally justify to everyone who's part of that society.
And to do that, you can't just pick one principle. You have to be constantly balancing all 5 of these pillars we've discussed.
Exactly. It's the active, ongoing process of balancing them. You have to balance desert-recognizing effort and accountability, need making sure everyone has a basic floor of dignity, rights protecting our fundamental freedoms, fair procedures, having impartial rules for everyone, and finally, social structures looking at the fairness of the whole system.
That sounds completely exhausting, but also absolutely necessary. So why should the average person care about this exhausting balancing act?
Because we all feel the wrongness of unfairness on a gut level. It's a survival instinct. We fundamentally want to live in a world that makes some kind of moral sense, where people aren't just crushed by random power or bad luck.
And there's also the sense that our own dignity is tied up in how our society treats everyone else.
Completely. Our sense of our own worth depends on living in a world that has some kind of moral coherence.
So justice isn't just this abstract thing for politicians and philosophers.
Not at all. It's a definition of reality. It lives in the little choices we make every day.
How we share things, how we listen to people we disagree with, how we judge others, how we forgive.
And how we participate in the systems all around us, from our workplace to our local community. It is both this grand society-level idea and a daily personal practice of fairness and responsibility.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to take away from all this. We spent this whole deep dive trying to answer the question, what's justice in theory?
But the deeper, more immediate question is this. In my own small corner of the world, how can I act in ways that are more just?
To strangers, to neighbors, to people who have less power than I do, and maybe even to myself. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
We look forward to diving in again soon.